Trey, last season you were out on the Baylor Bears. I was in on the Baylor Bears, and I wish I hadn't been. They go 6-7 last season, 4-5 conference record. They had one of the most embarrassing bowl losses I've ever seen in like sub 40-degree temperatures here in Fort Worth. The Air Force. It was a sad end of the regular season, 4-game losing streak. This year, I think the same questions that you have had last year still exist, although maybe not to quite the extreme nature. But the question for Baylor is, where is their offense coming from? They've got Blake Shapen back, but oh my goodness, he was the antithesis of consistent last year. He could blow out Texas Tech at home 45-17 and then turn around and they couldn't score against Kansas State. They couldn't score, or they lose to West Virginia. Now, Shapen got hurt in that game, but still, like, not many teams lost to West Virginia last year, right? So when I look at Baylor, I do really, really question the offense. The team's strength, I think, is the running game. Richard Reese is going to be really good, but they've got to rebuild that offensive line. And the team weakness is on the defense. So for me, you've got an inconsistent offense. You've got a defense or a secondary that only returns one starter. And oh, by the way, you bring in a new defensive coordinator. Matt Powledge comes over from Oregon. I think this is going to be a little bit of a learning curve year for a defense that has some good pieces. Devin Lemire is the lone starter in the secondary who comes back. He's a safety. TJ Franklin's a beast off the edge. And then AJ McCarty, who was a corner last year, now moves to the star position. But still, I can squint. And if Baylor's offense is really good, I can get them to 9-3. Again, I'm squinting. But realistically, I think you're really flirting with that bowl eligibility line. I've got 6-6. Garrett, I know you've had some takes with Baylor in the past as well. I mean, I don't expect a ton from Baylor this year. Certainly a change of tune from where it was a season ago.
Yeah, and I understand, getting burned by a team, kind of coming back down to earth. But let me kind of paint a little bit more of a picture, because I think that they could be okay. I don't think that they'll go over their 7.5. I have them at 7-5, but I think that they'll take care of what I think is a little bit worse competition. They do play three. They play UCF, Cincinnati, and then Houston. They do play three of the newcomers, and then they do get Iowa State. They do get West Virginia. I think those are weaker teams. If they can kind of run some of that, or even if they lose one of those, just go find a way to hop up over the top, right? You've got, Texas on the schedule, Utah on the schedule. You've got Kansas State, TCU, all those probably going to be very, very good teams. But, I mean, as you saw last year, even in a rough year, they still beat, an Oklahoma, a Kansas, some teams that were pretty good last season. They took it to Texas Tech. So they could – go over here and maybe win one or two extra games. But even if not, I think 7-5 is pretty much on the table for Baylor this year. I do think they're going to run the ball extremely well. I think, Richard Reese did what he was able to do. I think they're going to run the ball very, very well. And look, Shapen, a lot of love, hate. I've talked to a lot of Baylor fans this offseason. I've got a lot of people that I've been able to have conversations with. I don't think Shapen is going to finish maybe top half in terms of quarterbacks in the Big 12, but he could be in the middle of the pack. If he could just be a little bit more consistent, not turn the ball over. He doesn't have to be dynamic. I think they've got a good enough team that we're even just kind of an average quarterback play plus better defense, I think can do it for him. Is there a lot of reason to believe it? Maybe not necessarily on the paper, but I just have to believe that Dave Aranda, a defensive-minded head coach, is going to find a way to put a better defensive product on the field. They got a new defensive coordinator in there to kind of mix some things up. I'll take a little bit of parity within the Baylor Bears right now and say that they'll go 7-5, decent season, and I think that they have to position themselves well for the future of the Big 12.
Listen, it's the same as last year for me. Shapen could be a really good quarterback. And we don't know that because we don't know who he's throwing the ball to, and they just don't have game breakers at receiver like they did in the, recent past with guys that are still in the NFL to this day. So it's really hard for me to say one thing or another about Blake Shapen. He's not a guy that can do it without elite wide receiver talent. I think that's fair to say. And they don't have elite wide receiver talent unless,
They have Keytron Jackson coming in from Arkansas.
Keytron Jackson is a great pickup. I think that was one thing that they did to really address a big need, and you're absolutely right. We should call that out. And coming in from Arkansas, Hal Presley is another guy. The big recruit that they had a couple years ago was Armani Winfield. We've yet to see anything from him. I'm really interested to see if they can finally get him going and maybe adjusted to a college system. But yeah, I mean, if you're telling me that Baylor's going to win games, and when they won games a couple years ago and got to the Big 12 championship, it was on the backs of defense and a running game. If you're telling me we're not completely in on the defense or the running game, then I think it could be a long season for the Bears. I think they're going to struggle to get to bowl eligibility.
I think it's funny you mentioned Armani Winfield. Back in my sports marketing NIL days, I worked with Armani. But that's the only bit I've heard from him. So I certainly would love to see him on the field. I think Keytron Jackson will be good. Dominic Richardson transfers in from Oklahoma State as well, to be kind of that 1-2 punch with Richard Reese in the backfield. So yeah, Baylor can get some offense. They'll be plucky, right? 7-5, 8-4. But they're certainly a cut below the team that won the Big 12 championship.
Gracious him! How about that?